you. My name is Emma, and I'm hosting tonight's webinar with Julianne and Marama. My background is that I'm the chair of Women in Urbanism Aotearoa. I used to be a Generation Zero, well, I am a Generation Zero alumni. And I'm also running a thing called the Interest Elections, which is happening in Auckland at this very moment. So please make sure you go out and vote in that. All right, I think we'll start and we'll bring our wonderful MPs in. So, yay, hello. Cool, I'm just gonna kick this webinar off with a whakatauki. Mā te tene mā mano ka rāpati wai. By many, by thousands, the work will be accomplished. So kia ora tātou, ko hikarangi te maunga, ko wairoa te awa, ko whananaki slash māroa aho, ko McInnes toku whānau, ko Emma toku ingoa. So tonight I am joined both by Julianne Genter and Marama Davidson to talk about oh gosh, Sarah, my nerves are getting me, the emissions reduction plan. So I'm just going to briefly get Julie and Marama to introduce themselves tonight. So Julianne, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks so much, Emma, for hosting, and to everyone who's joined the webinar. My name is Julianne Genter. I've been a member of Parliament for the Green Party for just under 10 years. And I'm currently the spokesperson for finance, transport, urban development, building and construction, infrastructure, local government, energy, COVID-19 response, and I think a few other things. But those are probably the most relevant ones to the emissions reduction plan.
And to Marama.
Tēnā koutou katoa, no te taitokiro tēnei no ngā iwi o ngā puhi me Ngāti Porou, he uri anō hoki no te tai rāwhiti, no te rarawa me ngā puhi, he uri anō hoki no te tai rāwhiti no Ngāti Porou. Kia ora tātou katoa. Very honoured to be here with my friends Emma and Julianne tonight, and I have a specific interest, I suppose, through my ministerial portfolios. I'm the Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence and Sexual Violence, and that is the well-being part of the connection to climate justice, is an understanding that we need people to be thriving and taken care of as well, to be able to mobilise our community action. I'm also an Associate Minister in housing in the area of homelessness. And again, there's some very clear connections that we can discuss tonight, especially around energy and housing and the relationship to our emissions reduction plan that we're talking about tonight. So beautiful to be here with you all. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Marama. So thank you for those wonderful introductions. And I'm sorry about my slight baby brain there. But we're just going to open up by discussing first why the emissions reduction plan is so important. And so that's a question to both of you. So choose who starts.
Do you want to go? Okay. Well, the emissions reduction plan is basically going to be the roadmap for how government frames policy and its actions in order to achieve the targets that we've legislated for, which is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions so that New Zealand can pull its weight in the world and in the fight against climate change, but also the evolution towards a much more just and sustainable way of living and doing things. And so what's been put out by the government, just to be clear, is a work in progress. It's a consultation document, and you may think, why are we having another consultation on this? The government has these processes where it needs to do lots and lots of consultation. But I think the good news about it is we've had the general direction set by the Climate Commission. This is the work that's been done by different ministries that have to change the legislation or their spending or their policies in some way, and in order to achieve the targets that we need to meet. And I think it's really, really important that we get as many people submitting as possible to really push the government to do the maximum and to be ambitious and do effective things to take action on climate change.
Yeah, Marama, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Julianne. Thanks, Emma. I think what I probably wanted to focus on tonight was this is an emissions reduction sort of consultation document or beginning step, and what you can see in it, and what is quite clear, is if we are serious about reducing our emissions enough to really protect our climate and our communities, we've got a lot more that we need to push for. And that's what the purpose of tonight's webinar is just creating that, mobilizing communities and creating that momentum and that bigger mandate for bigger action and faster action. And that's got to make sure that all of the ministers across government are accountable for their bit, their departments, their agencies that are working together to do this work. Because as you know, we've got our fantastic Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, who is leading this work. And if you've heard over the interviews over the past sort of weeks since this draft plan was released, he too is absolutely clear that what is currently in the plan is not going to be enough to get us to reduce our emissions in a way that is going to have a planet that is sustainable enough for our grandchildren to live on. And so that's why these webinars are really important, mobilizing people's thoughts, having a discussion on where those gaps are and where people want to see more action, and then working out together how we can continue to encourage that constructive activism, I suppose, for making sure that when we do pull all of the feedback together, that James has got some really good mandate for pushing for further action. And that's what this emissions reduction plan is about. That's what's different about it. It's the first emissions reduction plan. And for Aotearoa, that's what's different, and that's why we need that further action and activism as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it is really important, despite the fact that we have quite a lot of submissions on these things, and people probably feel like they're tired from oversubmitting. I think that it's really important that we, make sure we host these webinars. So thank you for your mahi in doing this, to ensure that more people turn out and make sure that they submit, and make sure that their voices are counted. So yeah, it's really important work. And you mentioned too, you're talking about sort of the other MPs. So how does the emissions reduction plan set out exactly how each minister across government plans to reduce climate pollution to meet our emissions targets and address the climate crisis? Maybe I'll start with you again, Julie.
Well, it's broken down by sector, and in the discussion document that's been put out, which government is asking for feedback on, it has chapters on our major areas of emissions: energy, transport, agriculture, and waste, a few others. And ultimately, the ministers responsible for those portfolios are the ones that have to shepherd the policy and the legislation through the House, get agreement to it at cabinet in order to reduce emissions in those areas. So as Marama was saying, James has our overall strategic approach, responsibility for climate change, but ultimately emissions reduction has to happen in these other areas where there are other ministers in order to achieve the targets that have been set. And I just wanted to briefly, because I talk about, because this webinar is particularly focused on energy, and just talk about some high level points from Green Party policy where we'd like to see more emphasis from submissions to get faster action in order to reduce emissions from energy. I think, we've put together a bit of a submission guide or some suggested model answers, but it's really important that people use their own words and their own ideas and ours is by no means comprehensive in terms of how we're actually going to reduce emissions. Some of the things that we think can be done is pushing for faster phase out of low and medium temperature coal boilers. What's currently proposed is that they get phased out in 2037, which we think is too late. And so we want to push for those to be phased out much earlier. We think that there should, and I think the Climate Commission suggested this as well, no new gas connections in buildings from 2025. I mean, we know where we have to go. It doesn't make sense to keep putting in new gas connections when we're going to have to phase them out and stop using gas, fossil gas. And then we've also focused on the clean energy industry training plan, because obviously we're going to need to upskill quite a bit. But that's by no means a comprehensive suite of actions that need to be taken in order to reduce emissions from energy. There's a lot that needs to be done in energy efficiency, through the building code, through things like policies that support, a switch to hot water heat pumps, or heat pump hot water heaters, or like LED light bulbs. Like, all of these things can help reduce our electricity consumption in areas where it's not very efficient. And we're also going to have to grow our renewable electricity supply, because some of the other areas where we're shifting from fossil fuels, like transport, are going to rely on more electricity.
Thank you, Julie. Did you have anything to add on that one, Marama?
No, actually, I think Julian's raised some really specific points, and I'm happy to go on to the next one if you like, Emma.
Yeah, cool. All right, good. So could you explain then, Marama, I'll start with you, what a model based on te tiriti looks like, and how there can be more meaningful involvement with tangata whenua?
Yeah, really happy. And actually, I think I want to acknowledge a te tiriti response also acknowledges Indigenous leadership around the world, which has often seen Indigenous movements and people on the front line, especially of wanting to both stop and oppose dirty energy and dirty energy extraction, especially from their own lands, at the same time as upholding and pushing for the people and environment and climate-centred values that Indigenous peoples around the world have sort of built their existence and understanding and relationship with the world upon. And so if we come back here to Aotearoa then, we can, for example, really acknowledge, like Te Whānau Apanui, the Taitokero iwi and Ngāpuhi and Te Rarawa, Taranaki iwi right now, and further iwi down in Te Waipounamu in the South Island, who have continued to be a frontline and staunch voice and movements for whether it's oil and gas, whether it's deep sea mining, and around the world that is a very common, I suppose, hangover from, because climate change isn't just about climate change and isn't just about high emissions. Climate change is essentially a system that has been born from colonization and imperialism, and the theft of lands around the world, and particularly that impact in the removal of Indigenous peoples' lands from their sovereignty and responsibility, has ultimately been for extractive and polluting industries that have sought to build wealth for the few over the health and well-being of both the planet and the people. And so affording a tiriti justice response on climate change is actually a land back response, and a land back response is actually not just about land back, it's actually about grounding our plans in upholding the sovereignty and mana motuhake of iwi over their own lands and people. And if we have a look at the leadership that is currently happening across iwi, many iwi and hapu already have their own climate transition plans, because they know very well that rising seas and the impacts of climate change, for example, are going to wipe out marae and urupa and food growing sources and whenua, and are going to impact on coastal communities and also lower income communities the most and the hardest and the quickest. So a tiriti-centred focus has to be at the forefront of any plan to reduce emissions, has to uphold the mana and sovereignty of iwi and hapu over their lands and peoples, and has to work with Māori and tangata whenua as leaders in the plans in designing the sustainable energy and cleaner energy futures. And that's how we can get a more enduring plan as well.
Oh, thank you, Marama. And the emissions reduction plan, like, you believe that covers it as well?
No, not yet. It would be great for the broader government and public sectors, private and public sectors, to understand the importance of tangata whenua leadership. There are some really good examples of public sector and private sector working well with some tangata whenua and hapu and iwi groups around the country. There are some pockets and good examples of where that true partnership and enduring collaboration is starting to happen, but it's still nowhere near at the point that it needs to be.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Really good to hear that there's plenty of examples that we could be learning from around the country. I might just segue then to a question around just transition, because it feels like that's sort of more natural to start talking about that. What are important features to fairness and equity as we move towards lowering emissions?
I'm happy to jump in there if that's all right, Julianne, and have a first shot at it, because this for me is one of the pinnacle aspects of climate action and of a lower energy future, a lower carbon energy future, is actually a future around the justice of equally sharing the responsibilities and the costs across community and across society. At the moment, the status quo, and I've sort of alluded to that a little bit earlier in the history of colonization and imperialism around the world, the benefits are withheld to the few, but the negative impacts and costs are shared mainly among those who are already in disadvantage, those who are already negatively impacted upon. That needs to be completely turned around. So it's actually system change is at the core of a fair and just transition to a lower carbon community and a lower carbon economy. So it's primarily one that values human rights, work rights, labour rights, and it's actually primarily a just transition is one that understands at the centre of overturning the status quo system is proactive anti-racism, proactive anti-discrimination. That is actually at the core of overturning a pollutive system that we are currently in at the moment. And so again, it means making sure that we are designing low carbon opportunities with community, with workers and unions, with tangata whenua, with Pasifika. It means making sure that government has got specific plans to move away from high polluting jobs and economy to both supporting positive incentives and investment in cleaner energy jobs, in more sustainable jobs, and at the same time being really clear about what the government interaction and the interruptions are for polluting industries. So there's a little bit more that is involved in a just transition sort of approach, but those are some of the key principles: sharing equally and fairly the cost and the impacts, the benefits and the impacts, as well as working with communities to design the plans and making sure they're also suitable at a local and regional level as well.
Yeah, Julie, did you have anything to add to that as well, and maybe in relation to the emissions reduction plan, possibly?
I mean, I think Marama summed it up really well. I think, the main thing about a just transition is just recognizing that, we want to help and protect those who are most vulnerable in this transition. And we want to make sure that people whose livelihoods depend on greenhouse pollution are given an opportunity to retrain and to do other things that are really constructive, and that we can't just leave them on their own. If somebody's spent their whole career in coal mining or something like that, then we can't just tell them at the age of 55, too bad, you've lost your job. But I mean, the government can and should provide much better financial support to anyone who finds themselves out of a job. And I think that's one of the things we've learned about COVID-19, right? Because that, when that lockdown happened, it affected not all industries, but quite a few people's ability to work and trade. And that's really the purpose of government at that time, was to support us all to stay home, because we'd all be worse off if the virus had spread rampantly and people had been overwhelming the hospitals and sick and dying. Like, we're not, so that we can all work together. I think that's the thing, is it's about working together and using central and local government policy to support communities and support individuals in this transition. But we all have to do it together. We have to work together, just like we did with COVID-19.
Yeah, and what about not just people, but energy and the protection and restoration of our ecosystems as well, as a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I think they're quite intertwined. I mean, it is entirely possible that you could have solutions that in the short term look like they're reducing emissions, but actually are quite bad for ecosystems and biodiversity. And ultimately, what we want are holistic solutions that are good for people, good for biodiversity, good for the climate. And those solutions do exist. So I guess it's just really important to have all of those lenses across what we're doing, so that we're not making progress in one area, but going backwards in another area. And I think that's, there's lots of tensions around pine plantation forestry. I mean, that in the short term looks attractive for offsetting emissions, but actually, is it developing what we want to in terms of, value-added jobs, protecting native biodiversity? No. So obviously pine plantation forestry will be part of the short-term solution, but it can't be the only solution. And we need to, and that's why the Green Party has quite extensive policies on permanent forest sequestration and native forests, and just a much more sustainable, holistic approach to both land use and our economy. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is I think 70% of our forests are now overseas owned. We've got a shortage of building materials. We have a housing crisis. We're not processing much timber here in New Zealand. So we see raw logs going off overseas, where the owners of the forest have decided to prioritize companies back in their home country, and builders can't get enough processed timber. And on top of it, there's this opportunity to develop much more thriving and value added products here in New Zealand in a sustainable way. But that's going to take government action and government coordination. And that's what the Green Party is here to advocate for.
Yeah, I mean, jump in, Marama, too, if you had anything extra to say on that. But
I love it all.
Yeah, you love it.
Sorry, Emma.
No, it's all right.
You go too, Emma.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, that's something that I'm super interested in at the moment, especially since the Whananaki where I'm from is basically just becoming a big pine forest on the way to the beach. So yeah, I'm very fascinated in how we can, be ramping up the biodiversity and actually having more native species as well on that plan. I don't know if there's room for it yet, but it'll be really good to, see what comes of that in the future. But you might have some thoughts on it, Marama.
I actually think what you've both been talking about, the connection of biodiversity to sustainable planet, to enduring solutions to both climate change, but our entire ecosystem challenge, and actually the well-being of people. And as we know, the well-being of people and the well-being of planet are, absolutely intertwined. But I think we haven't emphasized enough the biodiversity challenge that we're all faced with today. the destruction and loss of so many of our varied and diverse habitats and plants and species is absolutely connected to a narrow understanding of our relationship with the world and of what we use and how we use our earth for energy to survive as humans. And the narrow focus and concentration that we've had such, it's really weird, you know, because I always think nature understands that all of the big things and the little things contribute to the overall wellness of the forests, for example. So nature gets that. Nature gets that just because it's the biggest, oldest tōtara tree, it doesn't actually rule the whole forest. It is interdependent and reliant on small species. And there are thousands of species that are actually living on big, old, ancient tōtara and kauri trees as well. And so the nature understands that all species are essential for the cycle of life. Humans haven't understood that, and unfortunately, we have focused our eggs into narrow and even sometimes singular industry and economic thinking and pathways. We have focused our energy and resource into short-term thinking that often privileges communities and groups over one another. We haven't understood the holistic ecosystem of thought and ingenuity and initiative that is required from different schools of thoughts, from different lived experiences. This too is key to an actual low carbon future. And I did want to pick up in the importance of our biodiversity, and of course they're physically related, like we're literally destroying our habitats with warming of the planet. So they're physically connected as well. But I wanted to pick up on how this relates. I think it was Pam who asked a really important question of, you know, what is a literal example of disadvantage in a just transition, and how people who are already struggling will be earliest and heavily impacted. And I'll take a really crude example, I suppose, is for those on lower incomes, already living in insecure housing situations, unhealthy homes that make their family and their children sick, and they do not know whether or not they're going to have a home next month, because currently the market impacts on those who do not own a home and do not have housing security. And so any sort of sudden weather event or extreme weather event is going to be already difficult for people who are already struggling. Those of us who have more privilege and fortune are going to be able to prepare ourselves better, our own families. Even just coming through Delta, and I have just come back to Wellington, as people know, but in Auckland, we're being told to prepare our whānau for emergency. We're being told to get kits ready, to make sure we've got extra stock of food, of medicines, of supplies. Those of us who have access to other forms of transport, people who are already in difficult situations, when our climate impacts hit, now that's just an extreme crude weather event situation, it is those people who are going to struggle to be able to look after themselves and their family in those events. But that's just one very crude example of climate change impacting on people in the immediate sense. But look, it's the same with long-term job losses and opportunities. And this is why it's so hard often to be able to, I had the comment where a person, I was talking about climate change and environmental protection, and if we want to mobilize communities, we're going to need people to feel like they've got any sort of control over their lives in the first place. And when I was talking about climate change, a woman came to me and said, you know what, until I feel like I've got a house to live in and put my roots down and be able to look after my family, I actually can't be bothered listening to your climate change talk. I'm just not there. I'm sorry, but I'm struggling to survive every single day. So this is why the connection of the well-being of people is absolutely critical to building our action for climate.
Yeah, that's just made me think. we know that, for example, women and low-income people are going to be some of the worst off when it comes to climate change across, like, globally. Do you have any idea of the impact there'll be for women in New Zealand? And is there anything in the emissions reduction plan that acknowledges that, or it doesn't quite go into that detail?
I don't believe that a gender lens has been put over the emissions reduction.
Oh, damn.
I was gonna defer straight to our previous minister for women on that one. No, I don't agree. I don't believe that there has been a strong gender lens. I also want to acknowledge, for example, again, a lens for those who have already been marginalised by society, by community, including disabled people. And that's going to be one of the most important parts of a just transition, is having that lens over any plan as well.
Cool. All right, thank you. I'll just go back to talking a bit more about the emissions reduction plan. You did sort of talk about this, but how does it set us on the path to a low emissions future, Julianne?
I just want to emphasize that this discussion document is really like a starting point. Yeah. It's not the end point. And I've seen a lot of questions in the chat, and to respond to some of them, I definitely think you should submit on the emissions reduction plan. It's not just about accepting or rejecting at all, because it's just a discussion document. So even if you want to just say something high level, like, I fully support the New Zealand government setting out a pathway for how we're going to reduce emissions, and I want to see action go further and faster than what is in this plan, if you don't want to get into the detail of lots of specific policies. I've also noticed there's a lot of really specific questions and policies in the chat, and I don't know if we're going to have time to answer all of them. So please don't be offended if we don't get to yours, because there's quite a lot. But definitely anything that you think should be suggested, suggest it, put it in there, put it in your, I do think the government wants to hear about it. And the most important thing is just to emphasize that you do want to see action, and that these are things that should specifically be investigated if they aren't mentioned in the draft discussion document.
Oh, just in case we forget, how do you submit on it, and where do you go to do that? So
if you look at the chat, Sean has linked that, and we might just do it again. But also, I think if you just Google emissions reduction plan discussion document or ERP discussion document NZ, you should get to the government website. This is on the MFE website. So it's a consultation page on the Ministry for the Environment webpage, and it has the entire discussion document. And it also, if you want to make a shorter submission, there's a link for that. And then there's also a really specific have your say, provide feedback, where it takes you through over 100 questions, which I don't think is a really good strategy for getting people to answer and feedback. I don't know for sure, but I don't think you need to answer every question. And you can also find on the Green Party, there's a Green Party submission form and detailed guide on the Green Party webpage, which has just been linked in the chat by Rosalie.
What do you recommend there? Do you recommend people doing the short submission or going through all of the questions? Like, what's going to be more powerful in that situation? Sorry, that's probably a really annoying question.
It's a really, really fair question. And and both Julianne and I have sat and do sit on select committees, for example. And what I always say to people when they're wanting to submit to our select committees, and I would say the same thing applies here, is focusing and prioritizing on your key issues that you know, that you're passionate about, that you have some experience or skill in is absolutely fine. You may not want to answer all of the different areas, and I would encourage people, if you have your particular passion areas, concentrate on those, absolutely. And also, they do not have to be lengthy. And in actual fact, and it's different, this is not a select committee process, but I would always say to people, actually, as MPs sitting on a select committee and hearing and reading submissions, those powerful, brief, impactful submissions always left us more solidly with something to remember. So making those powerful points and focusing on those particular issues that you're passionate about is absolutely fine. If you are one of our incredible skilled and knowledgeable technical experts in specific areas, then go for that. Go for that. But I guess what I'm just saying is everyone, every person and every member of the public has what they need to submit on their mission. You don't have to be an expert. We are all experts. We are all living on this planet. We have something to say as individuals and as community. And I would really encourage people to submit.
Yeah, I just got a question. Do you recommend brief submissions? And I think what I would say is I recommend the submission that you can make. So if you only have the time and energy to do a brief submission, that's better than nothing. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you really want to go into more detail, that's helpful too.
Yeah, so like if an awesome climate advocacy group sets up an sort of automatic submission and you just copy and paste because you're a busy mama and you don't have the time to go and, you know, write your own, like that's still good too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, been getting a lot of really good questions like that, because sometimes I think the admin stuff is the hardest thing to do, like the biggest hurdle to get over when it comes to submitting. Someone else has said, not sure what to do about submitting if we don't accept every part of it. So, you know, do you not submit at all if you don't accept every part of it? It's, they're just wondering if there's more opportunities other to just accept or reject.
Yeah, no, it's not accept or reject at all. It's an open discussion document. So you don't have to agree with any of it, or you can agree with parts of it, or, you know, it doesn't matter at all. The most important thing I think is just that you submit saying that you want to see more action on climate change. You want to see more specific actions. And again, there's the Green Party submission guide on the Green Party website. If you want to look at that, that could give you some ideas. There's probably other advocacy organizations that are putting together support for people to submit. So feel free to do that. And I just say that being aware that the industries that want to keep doing the same thing, that are reliant on fossil fuels or greenhouse pollution in some way, like farming, they're going to be organized and they're going to be submitting. So
yeah,
so we really want as many people as possible to submit in support of effective action.
Yeah, that's
Oh, sorry, Emma.
Oh no, it's okay. I keep cutting you off. It's like you go.
No, you're good. And as one of our amazing, particularly urban focused and gender analysis focused commentators across climate and environment and social justice issues, Emma, you absolutely feel free to pipe in there. Look, that was my little plug for people to vote for you. Anyway, I wanted to pick up on some comments coming through, really valid comments. And again, I would encourage people to, in terms of James, our climate minister's leadership, I would encourage people to have a look at, was it Breakfast and Radio New Zealand, some of the most recent media where, you know, when he's challenged, when it's put to him straight, what is currently in, remembering this is just a first sort of initial plan, we want the end plan to look differently. But when it's put to him that what is currently being proposed is not enough to get us to where we need to get to, he absolutely 100% agrees, and he says that publicly. So I've had some, you know, valid questions from people coming through saying we'd like to see James being able to be upfront about that, and I can affirm that he absolutely is, and even more so because all of the other ministers, as we've said quite a bit, need to also step up to the base, need to ensure that their agencies and their sectors are doing their bit. And I have been very encouraged to see James's public frustration playing out over the past couple of days, to both encourage people to submit And we hear you in terms of like, this is another plan, this is more consultation, we want to see action. He agrees, we absolutely agree. We would have liked to have seen action taken a long time ago. This is just part of the government process that needs to happen. We are unable to put an emissions plan out there without taking this other step. And so, yep, totally hear that. And just really, again, encourage people to make the most of this particular part of the process.
Yeah, and I'd say the Green Party obviously has been pushing solutions and arguing for this sort of stuff for more than 20 years in Parliament. And Jeanette Fitzsimons was, putting forward very detailed pathways on transport, energy, agriculture many decades ago. So I think the good thing now is that we have some non-politically aligned institutions like the Climate Commission and this legislation, which requires government departments to actually do the work and the thinking that is needed. And some people were probably a little bit dismayed when they saw that some aspects of the ERP were delayed because of COVID. And that really isn't because of any political decision. It really is literally a capacity issue. Because we had several decades of governments that weren't really focused on acting on climate change, it hasn't been a priority, and there hasn't been the capacity built in the public sector. But I think what's really good, and I totally feel the frustration of people who are well aware of the problem and know that we needed to act, many, many years ago in a much more dramatic way. That I still this is good, and we still need to feed into this process, because ultimately getting these big institutions focused on the problem as part of how we make progress. In fact, it's the only way. I mean, if we don't, it's not going to happen. So,
yeah, how do we? This is a question from Rosemary. I'm just trying to make sure that I get through people's questions, because thank you for taking the time to put them in the comment box. How do we compete with all the well-paid lobbyists?
Yeah. That was what I was really getting energized about when Julianne was highlighting that point, because it's such an important point, and it's why as many of you, and I'm talking to the broader you out there, the incredible passionate people who I can already see are coming through in the questions, as many of us together who can further link up with our other sort of groups and networks and friends and whānau, who can help to combat, who can help to build up that voice for change, that voice for bigger change, faster change, is going to be vital. Because, as the world changes and as we are moving away from and trying to do our best to move away from the current exploitative economic system, the old guard is going to bury down deep, it's going to dig in deep, and it is resourced. But I take motivation and hope and inspiration. We have seen people's movements work on big things, on little things, and especially here in Aotearoa, we have seen people be able to bring change simply by lobbying, working together, not having the millions or the billions of backing, but using the power of people, collective movements to make change. And here in Aotearoa, we've got a proud legacy of that. I think too that there's more and more awareness, and so it's good ripe ground for more people who just care. They just care about their planet, and they care about the world that we're leaving for our mokopuna, and they're ordinary folk. They're ordinary folk who may not consider themselves activists, but they absolutely care, and that's been shown. And I think we can also take hope from our young people who have already shown to organise as well. So there's hope there, and more working together to be able to get the mandate up for faster, urgent change.
I've got another one here from you, Marama. You have covered it somewhat already, but it's from Charlotte. But maybe we're just looking for a more specific example, which could be quite cool. How can we get more information on what is happening in this sector re-iwi involvement and actions? So she wants to be able to get involved in and assist and help.
Really that's such a good whakaaro. Thank you, because solidarity and working together is going to be essential to the change in the new sort of way that we relate to each other. It really does start at your most local area, and regardless of what area you are in. And I get this question quite a lot: how can we support? If you know anyone that might not necessarily be Māori, but anyone who might even know of where to direct you to start to come involved as an ally to support. And that's very slow work, building up the trust and relationship with any sort of groups is, we know takes time, but the approach to support iwi and mana whenua action and discussion the most critical thing is to just remember to remain humble, and that it's a supportive role and it's a learning role. Mm-hmm. It's a learning role, and wanting to truly understand the decades, the hundreds of years of background and context behind what any mana whenua group has gone through, and the impacts of colonisation, land and language loss, and then understanding how that relates to the action that they're putting up today. Someone earlier put in some really good examples further back of some examples. There we go, Scott again, Te Arawa Climate Change Strategy. There you go. And have a look, find that stuff online and what's relevant to your local areas as well. And see if you can reach out. It starts off with something as simple as perhaps showing up to their hui or events and doing nothing but sit there and listen and maybe introduce yourselves. Sometimes it can be slow building, but as long as you're there with humility and wanting to learn, that will eventually have good outcomes for you as well.
Yeah, I think if anyone's got some good examples, it would be great to keep sharing them in the chat for others. People in the chat might not know of local action that they can be taking at the moment, or what groups to sort of align themselves with. So I think it's a good chance to talk about work that's happening in your local area in that chat group now. One for Julianne. So this one is from Ash. It says, kia ora. Thanks for hosting this webinar. It's awesome to be able to directly connect. Ash is interested in thoughts from the panel regarding the trend where coal burners are being subbed for other combustion fuels, e.g. wood pellets. Is this a bit of a 2 forward, 1 backward approach?
That's an interesting question. I mean, my understanding is no, it's not. It's still better. It's still better than coal boilers. And it depends on how the wood and wood pellets are produced, if that's done sustainably, and the level of combustion of the burner. So you can have quite complete combustion that doesn't result in particulates or emissions to speak of. But are there other things we need to do in terms of energy efficiency? Absolutely. And I guess I have seen a lot of comments, and I'm sorry, it seems like not everyone in the webinar can see everyone else's chat, but it's quite the discussion, and it's very, very, very intense in a good way. Around growth versus degrowth and what's compatible with a habitable climate. And I think what I would say is absolutely the Green Party has always been the party that has said GDP does not measure human happiness or progress. And that's why we've argued for sustainability indicators instead. We had a private members bill on that, and that ended up sort of getting picked up by the Labour government in terms of their living standards framework and well-being approach. I don't think it's there yet at all, and they're still really focused on traditional indicators like GDP. But unfortunately, GDP growth doesn't just measure improvements in human happiness and progress. It picks up increases in pollution, in the drawdown of non-renewable resources, and even things like, car accidents and earthquakes and rebuild. It's just not a good metric for, I think, what we actually want to be measuring, which is, do people have enough to eat, healthy food to eat, healthy kai? Do they have warm, dry shelter that is secure, that has enough space for them, their whānau, maybe their extended whānau or their community? And do they have the opportunity to engage in meaningful, you know, I don't want to call it work, but in things that they're passionate about? You know, people have all different ways of spending time. It can be looking after kids, looking after their neighbors or elderly, making meals for others. You know, GDP only picks up commercial transactions, and some of those are useful for human progress and some of them aren't. So I just say that, like, the Greens are very aware of this issue, and I don't think we're shying away from it at all. But I do think that in the short term, what we need is to get everybody focused on the task at hand, and that is confronting the climate crisis. And we're trying to do that with language that invites people in and doesn't turn them off or make them think that what we're talking about is somehow a reduction in their well-being. Because I actually believe that we can use far fewer resources and have happier, healthier lives. And Green Party policy is a sort of recipe for that. And so I don't, you know, like, I don't want to get hung up on discussions about growth versus degrowth if that turns people off, because it's kind of a jargony term. And I know it's really interesting to those of us who are really passionate about that. But I think people want to hear us talk about things in everyday language that they understand what it means. And of course, the economy can't keep growing on a finite planet. That's just not possible. But that doesn't mean we can't have improvements where the people who are currently living in really, you know, who don't have enough electricity, who don't have a secure home, those people should be able to have those things. And that can be achieved absolutely with a transition to, you know, zero carbon energy and renewable use of resources. Like, we have enough to provide for the people who are here. Just enough.
Hey, and we've got about 5 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that if there's anything I haven't asked you to yet, if there's anything you'd like to talk about the reduction plan, just in this last 5 minutes, if there's anything we haven't covered that you think is important.
Thanks, Emma. I just wanted to acknowledge, and we're aware now that you can only see your own comments in the chat.
Yeah.
But a lot of people tonight in the chat have been putting through really awesome discussions around alternative energy sources and the pros and cons of different energy sources. Julianne just picked up on the sort of coal and pellet example and wood burning example. I guess I wanted to acknowledge that with any of all the different pathways to overall lower carbon future, all the different solutions still involve some level of sort of energy use, of course. And so, for example, someone was talking about, you know, even with solar, we've still got to think about battery production, storage production, so on and so forth. And yep, that's absolutely right. We are trying to seek together a whole lot of options for the pathways to the lowest carbon future possible. And it will require a range of solutions, of alternatives, and it will still, we acknowledge that it will still have some of those trickier questions around, actually, we're still employing and engaging some of those less sustainable, less cleaner energy options. But I think that's the overall question of how we live, and Julianne pointed to. We probably, you know, and I acknowledge this, I'm acknowledging this more personally as opposed to specific policy, that we're probably, many of us, understanding how to live differently and live well. And I think, you know, when some people who have felt like they've been on the edges for their whole entire lives and for generations of their family have just been struggle, and then we'll start to hear, oh look, you need to go and buy free-range eggs or an electric car. It's just wanting to make sure that we continue to bring people with us in that conversation of how to live well and how to live differently. And those values that you've all been pointing out in the chat are going to be absolutely how we have that discussion. Living well, living quality lives where we've got time to spend with our healthy families and our healthy homes, where we can relate and create connections and relationships in our communities, where our identities are upheld. All of those values are going to have to be at the forefront of all of the discussion around a lower carbon and a lower emissions in our future. And then I finally just wanted to pick up an example of the GDP growth sort of measurements that we've all been talking about, which is so relevant. I really love the example, and Marilyn Waring talks about it as well. You know, we're talking about energy, and we're talking about what energy we use to produce goods and what goods we produce. And breastfeeding is a classic example of something that GDP does not capture in terms of our economic health and also the value and contribution. And I'll just make a very quick sidetrack to say, by the way, however people are able to feed their babies needs to be supported. But if we are able to fully support those agency decisions that families can make as long as they have the support, and I acknowledge that sometimes it just doesn't work out. This is me as a breastfeeding mother who also struggled. But where we are able to put support and what people need to be able to make those decisions, they are also climate protection, energy reduction, emission reduction plans. And GDP has never captured the value, not just of relationship and bonding, but also the production and the food supply, all of the obvious things, the health, all of the obvious things. And so really happy to hear, and can we keep all together pushing for a different way of valuing and measuring what we do in the world.
Thank you, Marama. We're on 8 o'clock right now, but I just wanted to check that Julie didn't have any, like both of you don't have finishing comments as well before we all go off and get dinner.
All I'd say is we've got comprehensive policies on the Green Party website. And if you look at our election policies, you know, there was a real focus on reducing inequality, and you do that through a guaranteed minimum income and fair tax policies, and that goes hand in hand with reducing emissions. And then we've got our clean energy and transport policies. And so those could, you know, give you, if we haven't been able to answer your specific question tonight, hopefully that gives you a really good sense of what our policies are. I do think our energy policy could do more on just, you know, distributed generation. I wasn't the energy spokesperson last time, but there's some good starts in there, and there's clearly a lot more that needs to be done. So my main ask to all of you is just please do submit on the ERP and make the points that you've made in the chat. And that will be helpful. It will be a huge contribution to this process. And we need to hear your voice, because ultimately there's many more of you than paid lobbyists. So, but we just need your voice to be louder so that labor hears it and feels pressured to do the right thing.
And Marama, you want to have a close off?
Oh, look, just a quick sign off from me to again thank everyone for the passion that you've held and the incredible work that I know so many of you are already doing in your communities. I also wanted to acknowledge we've got Zoom and we've also got our Facebook audience tonight. Thank you so much for wanting to engage in one of the most important conversations that we all can be having. I really look forward to the ongoing submissions and the clarity that you provide us all. Kia ora tātou.
Yeah, there's so much good discussion happening from what I can see in the chat, that make sure you copy paste and put that in your submissions. It's excellent. Make sure that what you're saying, all your good ideas don't go to waste. Really grateful for you for questioning and all the great comments tonight as well, and taking time to do that. Thank you, Julianne and Marama. It's always great to be able to have this like direct conversation with you, and thank you for being so accessible as politicians. So I'm just going to wrap it up, and yeah, then we'll go off and
just one quick sorry, Emma, just one quick comment for people. The submissions close, the submissions on the ERP close on the 24th of November. I know some of you have been wanting to know that, and again, it's our greens.org.nz. You can find all of that submission and information on there as well. Thank you, Emma.
And I want to thank you, Emma, for hosting, and say everyone living in Auckland should be sure to check their mail and vote in the Entrust elections. And there's an awesome team, More for You, Better for the Climate. And Emma's one of the candidates standing that election. It would be really awesome to see a progressive climate voice in charge of the trust rather than the whoever's there now, classic sort of.
Well, thank you for the plug, and thanks for bearing with me. This is the first time I've done this before, and it is very weird looking at this screen. It's not your usual setup, so thanks for bearing with me tonight. Yeah, so I'll close this off. Manaki whenua, manaki tangata, haere whakamua, care for the land, care for people, and go forward. Thank you, everyone. Mā te wā.